Well, after that, I continued to work for the agency, back and forth in different operations, in different places. I was in Venezuela working in the 66. And in 1967, they recruited some Cubans to go to Bolivia. In the specific case that they got us was because there was a restriction from the U.S. ambassador in La Paz that no U.S. citizen could participate in combat because Vietnam was already taking place. It didn't want Americans to come back in body bag. So we were not U.S. citizens at the time, so we were not in violation of the ambassador's ruling. And therefore, we were selected to go to Bolivia to advise in the field the Bolivian Army and the 2nd Ranger Battalion, who was being prepared by U.S. Special Forces.
And by this time, you're a very experienced man who's been working for many years with the CIA. So I guess you were at that time considered someone reliable for such.
Yes, we were considered sort of expert in the area. As a matter of fact, when we arrived to La Paz, we were taken directly from the airport to President Barrientos' home, and we were introduced to him as an expert in guerrilla warfare, and that we were going to be advising his army. And we got ID card from the president and also from the commander-in-chief of the armed forces to get all their support in working with them.
How many people was Guevara there with, and what was his purpose there?
I think he was sent there really to be killed by Castro. He already had a problem because Guevara was pro-Chinese and he was pro-Mao. And of course, Cuba depended on the Soviet Union totally. So when he was sent to Bolivia, he was the one who selected a group of Cubans, like 8 or 10 Cubans. And then the Peredo brother got like 18, 20 or more Bolivians from the Communist Party. But then Castro retrieved the intelligence officer who was supposed to attend him in La Paz with the pretext that his visa had expired. I was told by others that it was ridiculous because the guy had the citizenship of Bolivia, and he was really abandoned in there. And the proof is that when Mario Monge, the head of the Communist Party, had the meeting with Guevara on the 31st of December of 1966, they completely became departed. I mean, the Communist Party then told Guevara that he was not welcome in there because they wanted to have the Bolivian in charge if they were going to support a guerrilla. And Che Guevara told them that he was the head of the guerrilla for Latin America. And therefore, from there on, all the Bolivians that were there that came from the Communist Party became dissidents of the Communist Party, and Mario Monge had nothing to do with Che Guevara.
How long were you there, and how difficult was it to catch up to him?
We were there for several months. We started working with the division several months before he was captured. We started working intelligence. Whenever they got a prisoner, we debriefed them. I saved the life of a prisoner that became very instrumental in the capture of Che Guevara, the life of Paco, Jose Castillo Chavez. And he was able to give us the movement of Che Guevara, how he was organized, the name of the people in the vanguard, the people with him in the center, and the people in the rear guard. Of course, the alias name that he knew them by. And that was instrumental because in the end of the month of September, when there was an encounter of Lieutenant Galindo with the guerrilla, and they killed 3 guerrilla that obviously were from the vanguard of Che because the name coincided with the information Paco gave us. That's when I was able to convince Colonel Centeno to move the battalion into operation 2 weeks ahead of time. So the battalion was moving to operational area at the very end of September. They deployed at the beginning of October, and the intelligence team that we had trained that spoke the Quechua and the Aymara, that were young soldiers, and they went out in civilian clothes to gather intelligence from the farmer. On the evening of the 7th of October, came back with intelligence. There were voices at Quebrada del Yura, and nobody was supposed to be there. And that's when Captain Gary Prado surrounded that area. On the 8th of October in the morning, Che Guevara was captured and wounded.
What did he say? Did he say anything? What was his reaction to being caught? And also, when was the first time that you saw him after he was caught?
On the following morning, I arrived at 7:30 in the morning with Colonel Centeno and I at the head of the division in a helicopter. And we all entered into a room and they tried to talk to him. He would not talk to them. So later on, I was given them at my request all his documentation, including his diary, which I photographed for the agency. And then I came in to talk to him, and he was on the floor, he was tied down, and he would look at me, and when I tried to talk to him, I say, nobody talks to me, nobody interrogate me. At which I told him I didn't come here to interrogate you, I just want to talk to you. I mean, you were a head of a state in Cuba, and you're here because you believe in your ideal, even though to me they are mistaken. I just came to talk to you. So to look at me for a while and say, can I sit, can you untie me? So So I ordered a soldier to come in and to untie him, and we sat him on a little bench, and then we start talking back and forth. Of course, when I tried to ask him questions that were of tactical interest to us, he would smile and say, I cannot answer that. But we did talk about many things, and even when he stayed in Africa, which at the beginning he didn't want to talk about it, but he did recognize that he was in Africa, and the African soldiers were pretty poor soldiers.
What did he give details about what he did at all?
In where?
In Africa?
No, not much. We didn't need that many details. He didn't want to even recognize that he was there. When he started passing information, we already knew from prisoners of his. I pinched him by telling him, well, they told us that you had 10,000 African troops and they were very poor soldiers. So he smiled and said, well, if I had 10,000, it would have been different. But you're right, they were very poor soldiers.
Did you talk about all the people he executed at the time?
Yes, it was a point in time. I told him, the people that they were executing in Cuba. He said, well, they are foreigners working for the CIA. And I said, that's ironic that you tell me because you are a foreigner here. And you are here in Bolivia. I said, well, you don't understand it. These are things of the proletariat. And I feel as Argentinian, as Cuban, as Bolivian.
So he would actually go around using those words like proletariat and
yes.
Did that seem a little ridiculous, somebody talking like that, or did that seem like natural coming out of his mouth?
I guess it was his only answer. He had no other answer. For example, when I talked to him about the Cuban economy, he was telling me that it was bad because of the United States embargo, etc. And I told him, you are part responsible for it because you were not an economist. You were head of the National Bank in Cuba. And then what his answer was to that, which really is no answer, is, do you know how he became head of the Cuban economy? I say no. He said, I was sitting one time, I was half asleep near Camilo, and I understood Fidel was asking for a dedicated communist, and I rose my hand. And he was asking for a dedicated economist. I thought I was just, trying to get away from answering the question. But later on, when I met Dariel Alarcón Ramirez, one of the colonels that was a captain at the time, accompanied him and survived Bolivia, he told me that it was true. It was right. He was sitting right next to him, Camilo, and Che was half asleep, and that's exactly what happened.
That's actually a funny story.
Which, it tells you a lot of the way Fidel conducted business in Cuba.
It's like straight out of the Woody Allen movie Bananas. You've seen that movie?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Well, so can you tell me how was his attitude, his mood? Was he arrogant? Was he cocky? Did he look scared?
No, after we start talking, he was really down. You could see a man that was destroyed. He looked like a beggar, really. He had very poor weapons. He didn't even have a real uniform. It was just rags that he was. He didn't have boots. He was some kind of leather tied down in his leg. I mean, he gives you the impression of a beggar. You feel sorry when you see somebody like that who's supposed to be a soldier. I used to remember when I remember his image. It was the first time I saw him in reality, but the one that I remember him was he visited the Soviet Union when he visited Mao in China, his big coat and arrogant, and now here's a man that is completely destroyed.
How did his execution come about? Can you talk about that?
Well, our instruction from the U.S. government was to try to keep him alive at all costs, and we had helicopter and plane to move him to Panama for interrogation, especially knowing that obviously he was at odds with Castro.
Was there any plan ever to bring him to the U.S.?
No, Panama. But then, obviously the Bolivians were having a lot of problems with a trial that was being conducted of Debray, the French journalist, and also from Bustos, an Argentinian journalist. And Debray was like an intellectual from France who later became advisor to President Mitterrand in France. And it was a big problem for them because of the inherence of the French embassy, the Argentinian embassy, the students. And I guess that was what triggered the order to eliminate him. They felt that it was such a problem, this trial, it was costing them so much to these two unknowing people. What would be a trial to Che Guevara? So I think that was what weighed very heavily in the decision of the president and the commander-in-chief to execute him.